I don't know about you, but I regularly start conversations with my boyfriend like this. So, I listen to this podcast about. He tends to laugh at me and joke at my slight, huge obsession with regularly listening to a wide variety of interviews and random information via podcasts. However, when I did just a little bit of research, I quickly realized that I wasn't alone in having this obsession. Podcast marketing numbers. Today, over 68 million people listen to podcasts regularly. That is about 1 in 4 people. Of that 68 million, about 44% of those listeners are between the ages of 18 and 34, or, as many like to call, millennials. On top of that, in 2008, there were only about 10,000 podcasts available on the Apple iTunes Store. To contrast, there are over 60,000 podcasts in the store as of this writing. Let's face it, podcasting has become an unstoppable form of content marketing. Just like me, you are likely to hear people saying they listen to things from Freakonomics to NPR Radio Hour to This American Life to Murder Mysteries. Plus, there are now even more places to find these podcasts: Amazon's Audible, Apple's iTunes, Spotify, Podcastone, iHeartRadio, etc. Most podcast listeners also happen to be educated. 27% of U.S. podcast listeners have a 4-year college degree versus 19% for the entire U.S. population. But what has caused this rise in podcast popularity, and should you capitalize on it as part of your company's content marketing strategy? Why are podcasts so popular? An easy answer for the rise in popularity is that podcasts are an easily digestible form of content. Whether you're driving, walking, commuting, or working out, you can listen to a podcast. It doesn't require you to look at your screen or read, but merely listen, while perhaps multitasking on other things, like writing this blog post. With a vast array of options at your fingertips, it is no wonder that more people are able to find something they like and listen to regularly. On average, podcast listeners listen to 7 different shows a week. With more options, listeners are able to digest even more content more regularly, which is what we want as our marketer or business owner, right? How can you capitalize on podcast marketing? As a business owner with a specific brand, there is a lot of opportunity to capitalize on the podcast medium. Whether it is starting your own regular podcast or partaking in interviews on other relevant podcasts, there is a unique opportunity to build a following, attract loyalty from that following, and create unique content and branding. Podcasts are relatively easy to produce, convenient to consume, and will help you stand out from competitors. It also gives you a unique opportunity to build trust with your audience, and that will potentially drive business and leads to your brand. Another great way to capitalize on your podcast is to video record the podcast and post the episodes to YouTube. As we know, video marketing is a fast-rising medium, much like podcasts, so this would allow you to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Not only will you be populating your podcast library, but your YouTube library as well. What kind of podcast should I start? Here are a few ideas for what kind of podcast you could start based on your industry. An expert podcast. Start a podcast that addresses issues that you solve for others. Not only will people that need these answers be interested in the podcast, but people that have the same expertise as you do will look to your podcast for advice and an expert opinion. A networking podcast. Once your podcast gains some traction and popularity, invite others from the industry to come onto your podcast and broadcast what it is they do and how they do it. This is a great way to network and also give valuable insights from others to your users. This strategy will also keep your content very fresh. A solo cast. Sometimes starting a podcast might be more beneficial for you than it is for your listeners. Starting a solo cast would be a great way to decompress and just get your thoughts out to your listeners. After you post the podcast, be sure to be available on social media to answer any of the questions that listeners may have had while listening. This is another great way to interact with them. As you can see, podcasts aren't going anywhere. I highly recommend you find one that piques your interest and invest some time listening. We are going to do some more digging on podcasts in coming weeks, so be sure to stay tuned. Next, we will be tackling how to potentially create your own podcast. In the meantime, check out a few of my favorites below: The Tim Ferriss Show, This American Life, Armchair Expert with Dax Shepard, How I Built This with Guy Raz, Serial,